Good afternoon, and week 8 of the top 100 artists of all time. And we're still in the A's, we've got one more A to go, but this is the last group within the A's. It's a British group, it's a Yorkshire group, it's from Sheffield, it's the Arctic Monkeys. The Arctic Monkeys' career got off to an incredible start. They formed a band as school kids in Sheffield in 2002, but ground zero was 2005. That's the year they really took off. Their meteoric rise taught Roebuck and actually owed more to their local fan base than to any record company. What happened was the group gave away CDs of their demos at local gigs to their local fans. It was the early days of social media, and it was actually the fans, not the band, who set up a MySpace account for the band with all their early tracks on. It was incredibly well received, incredibly successful. The hype grew to unbelievable levels. It was a MySpace account where you could download their music for free. I'd assume the band were marketing geniuses, but they generously concede. At first, I didn't know what MySpace was even. It was the fans who created the buzz. I first saw them towards the end of this era at the 2005 Leeds Festival on, I think it was on an introducing stage. The organisers had dramatically underestimated this up-and-coming band's popularity, and it was only by getting there early that I got anywhere near the tent they were playing in. The excitement was palpable. 2 months later, just 2 months later, they issued their debut record, their debut single, I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor. Still their most recognisable song today. A punky drum and guitar intro, Then We're Away. It went straight to number 1. Alex Turner, the songwriter and lead vocalist in the band, main talent in the band, I suppose, was just 19. The others in the band were Jamie Cook, Matt Helders and Annie Nicholson, but none of them were any older than 20. Their first album, Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not, was released at the beginning of 2006. It was, at the time, the fastest selling debut in UK chart history. It sold over 360,000 copies in a week. I still think this is their best album. The album wasn't just a commercial success, it wowed the critics too. It won the 2006 Mercury Prize and the 2007 Brit Award for Best Album. They also won Best Group. Part of their early appeal was that they just seemed like ordinary lads from Sheffield. Their songs told stories their audience could identify with, stories about taxis and friends who got too drunk, etc. Alex Turner's lyrics were superb at times. The paradox for me was, as articulate as Alex Turner was in song, whenever you heard him interviewed, he came across as surly and communicative, perhaps with shyness. In later years, he's become a bit more articulate, but less likeable in a way. He's somehow developed a most extraordinary accent, which is a blend of Yorkshire and USA, I assume. Yeah, they were getting a profile all over the world by now, but I think the UK is still their biggest market. The pressures of success and international tours, it must be hard being a millionaire for music when you're 20. Nonetheless, it caused the original bassist Sandy Nicholson to conclude it wasn't live for him. Fair enough. Not for everybody. Nick O'Malley replaced him. Their second album came out the next year. That's how it should be. You should be releasing albums every year. It came out, second album came out in 2007, Favourite Worst Nightmare. very, very fast, very, very loud is how the band described it. It was a good album. To me, it wasn't as good as the first album, but it still sold nearly a million in the UK, and it still won the Best Album Award at the Brits, and they were popular enough to headline the Glastonbury Festival for the first time. They've slowed down after that, if we're honest. Took them 2 years to come up with their third album, Humbug, in 2009. Worthy effort, but they weren't selling quite as many by now. The singles weren't doing as well either. Suck It and See in 2011, I actually like that album. It's probably Suck It and See is probably my second favourite Arctic Monkeys album after the first, but it didn't sell as well. Yes, all their albums have gone to number one, but it wasn't as nailed on a number one album as earlier albums had been. The singles weren't doing as well. Why weren't the band doing more records? Why were they taking so long between records? Part of the reason was Alex Turner had a side project, The Last Shadow Puppets, another band he was in with Miles Kane. They did throwback records which sort of owed a massive debt to the 60s sound of Scott Walker. Then in 2013 they had their commercial renaissance. In 2013 the song Why Do You Only Call Me When You're High was a top 10 single, the first top 10 single they'd had for 6 years. And AM, the album it came from, told us they were back with a vengeance. I actually preferred the previous album, Suck It and See, but the music press loved the album AM. NME said it was definitely the best album Arctic Monkeys ever came up with. It was number one, of course, but it was also a million seller. The first million seller since the debut album, and it sold 1 million records in the US too. Compared with their early work, perhaps they're less frenetic, closer to heavy rock than punk, but it's also incorporating by now some more modern hip-hop beats even. So for the third time, almost inevitably, they got the Brit Award for Best Album. This sounds a real achievement. They are one of only 2 artists to win the Brit Award for Best Album on 3 separate occasions. You might think what a magnificent achievement, till you hear that the other band who have achieved this are Coldplay. So, perhaps being bracketed with Coldplay isn't the dream for everybody. Not liking Coldplay, they are quite good, but really? Then, of course, having had such a well-received album, the Arctic Monkeys slowed down further. They took until 2018, 5 years before they released another album at all. And even then, this album, I think, was originally intended as an Alex Turner solo project, but the record company thought it would sell better as an Arctic Monkeys. It wasn't at all in their style. It was like a lounge record, lounge piano. Matt Helders had been more successful, made some better music than anybody else in the band in this period, when he played drums on the new Iggy Pop album, which turned out to be the most successful album Iggy Pop ever had. But back to the last Arctic Monkeys album in 2018, Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino. It was different. It went to number one on the album charts. The Enemy, with monotonous predictability, made it their album of the year. It was their 6th consecutive #1 album, and it's became the country's fastest selling vinyl record in 25 years. Probably a large proportion of the people who buy it on vinyl never even play it though, but that's another matter. They're the first band on an independent label, Domino Records, to have had so many #1 albums. It bored me. The Arctic Monkeys at the beginning were one of the best bands in the world, and on the strength of their early work, they're well worth a place within my top 100 groups of all time. But I'll be honest, I think they are already on the way down. There's nothing from their last album on my playlist, and I'm not alone, because despite the critical reviews, the critical raves, after initial flurry of excitement, it sold far less than any of their previous albums. I've no idea when their next record is coming out. Okay, next week, the last of the A's. It's astounding how out of 100 groups to choose from, 9 of the best 100 are in the A's. The final A isn't a band, it's an American, it's a lady. Work out who it is. You should be able to do that. See you next week. Bye.